which are identified as RP images. Now, the images in themselves are legal. The offence is to post without consent. And so we've been navigating terms and conditions because many providers do not want these sorts of images on their services either, so using those mechanisms to remove that particular content. But a big section of those that we support too is the police and their understanding in terms of what these new RP laws actually mean. And so through some form of, through research that we've recently done, concluded that the vast majority, over 90% of police don't actually recognise these new laws, and we have actually seen it being used incorrectly as well, so prosecution of children to do this in terms of sharing of indecent images, which is what they would be classified as. So I would very much echo the training, the awareness, particularly across law enforcement, about what these laws actually mean, and I just cite this as a specific example.
Can I just jump in there? I think it's really important here to emphasise that we already have an awful lot of laws and legislation that deals with particularly content and speech, and I think we need to be very careful. The tendency is often to create more laws where none are actually needed, because the impetus is always to be seen to be doing something. And I think as we're thinking about the white paper, which I know we're going to talk about, one of the things that I think we need to think about very carefully is whether new legislation is needed, whether regulation is the preferred option, and if regulation is the preferred option, who does the regulation, and what is the role of the government in that. Because at the moment, what we're doing is we're sort of suggesting that the legislation, the protections don't exist for these things online, when actually very often they do, to deal with harassment, abusive content. But what's happening is we're conflating all of these terms. So we're conflating abusive with harmful, harassment with offence with hate, and legal and illegal, and all of these things are being conflated in a way that people feel that not enough is already controlled or legislated on, where actually the most egregious forms of behaviour, if you like, related to speech online are already being regulated and already crimes.
I think, sorry, just to jump in here, I think some speakers like to swap out and swap in, so if we could just quickly do that.
Who's coming? Come.
Did. So this is the most energetic panel I've ever been on in my life. I feel like I'm more in a goldfish tank than a goldfish bowl, but there we are. I find myself with questions, and I don't know if I'm allowed to do that as a panelist, but I find myself with questions for our first group of goldfish. And that question is really based on the work that we do with parents around radicalisation and extremism as part of a programme that's called the Resilient Families Programme. And that programme is really working primarily with mothers, but with children as well, but primarily with mothers, to help them feel more confident about protecting their children from some of the negative influences that they might be exposed to online, certainly up to and including the risk of being radicalised. And what we know from working with those families is that they are extraordinarily nervous of looking for information about that subject matter, because they feel as though they're going to have a red flag if they do anything, even as active as Googling a question about that. So it's an incredibly sensitive and difficult topic to work with families on. And their pushback to us is, where are the protections? So if you can't tell me when hateful language becomes hateful, how am I supposed to tell my child? Where is that line? And if it's not law, and I hear the complexity of doing the legal piece, and I have a 20-year-old son who bangs on about freedom of expression at every given opportunity. I absolutely understand that importance to steer us away from North Korea. I don't personally feel as though making us a safe place to go online equates to us being North Korea, but I absolutely understand that position. If it's not the law, if we can't get to that place, then whose responsibility is it? Does the natural conclusion of that argument take us to a place where we say, actually, the platforms that are allowing those sorts of discussions to take place have to carry some responsibility for the discussions that they're having, that they're allowing on their platforms? Does it mean that we have to see them as publishers? Because I can certainly say to a parent that they can rely on, let's say, good old auntie the BBC, not to air views that are, if not legally hateful, certainly hateful in ways that parents would understand it. But I absolutely cannot say that to them about platforms like WhatsApp, Snapchat, Facebook, any of those platforms. So if it's not legal, if we can't define hateful in legal terms, who's going to take responsibility for what families would recognise as hateful? Sorry, that's a question, not a comment.
Jump in there, if I may? This is kind of going to start blurring into what we're going to say in the next part of the conversation, so I'll let Alex tell us when we're moving into the next conversation. But I think the question of who's going to do this is, I hope, the kind of priority of this group to really be debating. And some of you might have seen that earlier this week at LSE we launched a proposal for an independent platform agency. It was largely in the context of, quote, fake news, but I think the argument for some kind of independent body is now really mounting on all sides, and lots of different organisations I know in the last few months have been trying to deliberate about all kinds of problems in relation to online harms, and are proposing that we need a new body to do this. So I think how that represents an answer to Vicki's question and Alex's is that we are seeing the platforms taking all kinds of action already in relation to all kinds of online harms. And I don't want to disparage the efforts that they're taking, but by and large, they don't do so in a way that meets the expectations of a public solution to a national problem, which is that the solution, the steps that are taken and the processes that are gone through should be transparent. Yes, that's important, but transparency is by no means enough. Accountable, fair, and inclusive in terms of who it is that has the chance to influence that process and engage with it. And civil society is rarely or never included in the platform solutions, and those who are affected. And a lot of my research is on children, so wonderful some of the things that the platforms are doing to keep children safe from online harms, but children are not involved in that process, despite it being their right to be consulted on all matters that affect them under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, among other legal standards. So I think the case is really mounting, and not to jump forward to our third debate, but I think the calls are widespread that we need some legislative solution, not necessarily to step in and regulate speech or actions, but to set up a body that has the oversight and the responsibility to really investigate some of these very difficult lines between what is offensive and what is harmful and what is illegal.
Gosh. So much there from my panellists. So I guess for the goldfish analogy, my challenge is not to have that 2-second memory and try and think about what are all the really kind of pertinent points and significant points everyone's made, and which of those I might choose to respond to. So I get a couple of reflections then. These are not necessarily kind of linear or joined up. So Ofcom published some very helpful research in September this year, which looked at people's experience of harm online. And within that, they tried to kind of break out a little bit between some of these definitions, between what is offensive, what is abusive, what is bullying, what is hate speech. I'm not sure quite exactly what definitions they put around each of those, but I'm sure they're publicly available or available from Ofcom if people are interested. And I think they recorded that hate speech was at around 6% of UK adults said they'd experienced that within kind of a recent period of time, which percentage-wise sounds fairly low, but actually in terms of numbers of people, that is significant numbers of people who have experienced that. And then I think back to the point Barbara was making, that I think what's really important within that is the the severity of harm experienced as a result of that particular type of content or interaction is clearly quite significant. So that needs to be taken account in how we deal with these issues. But that same piece of research that Ofcom published also asked people what I thought was a particularly helpful question around what do people do if they experience a whole range of online harms. And what was really striking for me from that piece of research was only 1 in 5 people actually said that they had taken any action to deal with an online harm that they'd experienced, and that a minority of people felt that they would use a report or had used a report button to do something like that. There seemed to be a real gap between people's concern and potential experience of online harms and their knowledge about the routes by which they could proactively do something about that. And I think that is a challenge for industry and for regulation to play a role in tackling. So at the Carnegie UK Trust this year, we've been doing a whole series of work led by one of our trustees, William Perrin, and Professor Lorna Woods at Essex, University of Essex, around what a regulatory system for tackling online harm, including hate speech, might look like. And we've proposed a duty of care model whereby platforms have a duty of care towards their users, and they design at the system level, rather than about specific pieces of content, at the system level, ensure that systems minimize the likelihood of harm occurring to people who are using that platform, and actually to non-users of that platform, but about whom content might be posted about. And the revenge porn example is a classic example of that, where the individual who's experiencing the harm might not actually be a user of the platform, but whom the duty of care should absolutely apply to. And I think we think that this model has real opportunity, because actually it takes that classic public policy position of setting the outcomes that we as a society want to achieve. We want to minimalise these experiences of harm, including hate speech that people are experiencing. And it's saying, this is what we want to achieve. Okay, technology companies, use your expertise, skills, technology to design your systems in a way that help deliver those outcomes. So you're not being overly prescriptive about how those are achieved, but you are regulated. You have an independent regulator. We suggested an existing regulator because that would be more cost effective and could be done more quickly, and have that in place to work with providers in a kind of co-regulatory approach to monitor and report on and seek to have a kind of virtuous circle of harm reduction. So we think that's an effective way to tackle some of those issues.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Douglas. I'd just like to say, people, if you'd like to ask questions throughout, do feel free to throw your hands up. We are going to move on to the next section now. So if you'd like to ask a question now, quickly.
More of a comment than a question. My name is Abhilash Nair, based at Aston Law School in Birmingham. Hi, my name is Abhilash Nair. I'm based at Aston Law School at Aston University in Birmingham. I just want to pick up on the points raised by Jodie in relation to, do we need more regulation in terms of speech? And I agree that law is not a one-stop shop solution for some of these problems. But I kind of disagree in the sense that some of the topics that we've covered in terms of revenge pornography or image-based abuse, they go beyond what's essentially a speech issue. Because from the victim's perspective, it's not just a freedom of speech issue, it's actually a criminal act, for example, in some cases at least. So the question we need to ask is, are existing laws capable of dealing with that appropriately? If not, we need legislation, and I don't think to classify it as a content offence justifies the gravity of the offence. That's where I see it. Say, for example, just to give the example of revenge pornography, there are debates regarding what's the appropriate way to regulate it, as civil or criminal. But equally, I think the focus of the law really should be on the harassment element, lack of consent, rather than the image itself. The law has traditionally focused on the wrong thing. You just look at the image as a standalone concept, but what that image means to the victim is an entirely different matter. That's where this debate goes slightly beyond a speech issue, and it becomes slightly more of a conduct or a contact offence in some ways.
I think we should find another microphone. If we could just bring that microphone up to the front, that'd be fantastic.
So just to clarify, I don't disagree with you. I think there's points at which speech acts become other acts. so a point at which repeatedly ringing somebody up and hurling kind of verbal abuse at them is not simply an exercise of free speech. It's harassment and abuse. What I'm saying is we need to be very careful about how we understand those things, because at the moment what's happening is people are on their own, if you like, on their own merits, deciding that content or speech uttered by other people is simply hate speech and therefore ought to be prosecuted. And that's where I think we need to be very careful, because if we get into this territory in which it's possible for everybody to sort of make their own definitions of harm and hurt, then we get into a situation where it's very easy for people simply to restrict the speech of others whom they disagree with, politically, for example, or whom they disagree with on a matter of policy. We see this particularly at the moment in the transgender discussion. The terms hate speech are being bandied around very, very widely in a way that is shutting down, in my view, legitimate discourse. And that has an implication not just for freedom of expression, but for democracy more generally. So just to clarify, I'm not suggesting that no speech has consequences that ought to, in some cases, result in criminal action. I think we just need to be very careful about continuing to expand the definition of those speech acts that should be considered criminal.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for that. I think we're going to move on now quickly, because I'm aware of time, to the next section, which is on cyberbullying and online marginalisation.
I think there's some questions.
I think we'll try and take some more, but I'm just quite aware of time. We've got a lot to get through. But we will take some more at the end of this section. So, like I said, the next section on cyberbullying and online marginalisation, I think just another open-ended question to kick it off. We're rightly concerned with ensuring that online safety whilst children are concerned, but is there a risk that we go too far? Don't children have to learn how to protect themselves? And for that to happen, don't they need to be exposed to risk? And following on to that, I mean, is there a desirable level of risk that we should be kind of identifying?
Shall I kick off on that impossible question? Yes and no. I mean, the theory of child development is always going to say that people become resilient by facing some degree of risk within their existing capacity, having the resources and support with which to cope with that, and become stronger as a result. What's happening online doesn't meet those kinds of criteria. So children, and indeed adults too, are exposed to all kinds of risk in a completely unmanaged way that may be way beyond their capacity to manage, and the level and array of support around them that would, traditionally, in the theory of developing resilience, that level of support is not, by and large, available to them. So the theory is right, the practice is a long way from that theory, and cyberbullying, if we go with that word, but all the kinds of forms of online abuse, hostility, reputation damage, sometimes drama that is occurring, is finding a wide range of different kinds of victims. So it does link very strongly, I think, to the question of marginalisation, and so we can see in the research on children that children from ethnic minorities, children with disabilities, children who are recent migrants, a whole range of children in terms of sexuality. There's a whole range of those who are relatively more marginalised, who are more the victims of online abuse. But just to add a few complications. I mean, one is that in relation to children, there's quite a lot of research, and by and large, what we can see is a considerable overlap between, as it were, victims and perpetrators. So there is, I think, as Barbara said earlier, the levels of inequality, unhappiness, poverty, difficulty in society are what we're seeing manifest in the kinds of hostility and cyberbullying online. It doesn't come out of the blue just because it's a fun thing to do, or at least it doesn't become harmful for that reason. But in relation to adults, and I think it's brave of the DCMS to write a white paper for the entire population, I think we really don't know how much bullying is experienced by adults and what character that has and what harms it results in. So I think there is a kind of a huge unknown in terms of the scale of the problem that we're now trying to regulate for. Just one thought in response to something that Douglas said earlier. So when we do get those statistics, I spend a lot of my life looking at the statistics on all the different kinds of harms to all the different kinds of people. They can seem quite low, and low we should be heartened by. We shouldn't always be trying to talk up the harms. For children too, cyberbullying is reported by, let's say, between 5 and 15% of children, depending on how you measure it, which is a rabbit hole I won't go down now. But 90% of children, we might say, and 90% of adults, all of those who are online, are now living in their online lives in a culture in which they have seen this, in which this is commonplace, in which all kinds of hostility and abuse and aggression are visible to everybody, including that which penalizes and targets minorities of many kinds. So I think, just to sort of push back on the, as with Vicki, I'm completely, I don't want to say anything that would undermine free speech, but I think we could use this argument for regulation to advance free speech, because we don't have any handle yet on the chilling effect of living in an online environment in which all kinds of hostility and abuse is visible, and in which there is evidently no penalty or rebuke to those who do it. So it's an extraordinary world that our children are growing up in, and we just don't know how much is not said. But what I see now, talking to both children and parents, is a very considerable degree of caution stepping in and risk-averse kind of strategies emerging, which means that the very idea now of exploring the internet, experimenting online, making new friends online, all of these things that we thought were the very purpose and pleasure and promise of the internet now sound like crazy strategies to put yourself, to make yourself a victim. And people are becoming very risk-averse about the online world, and I think that will damage the democratic space, the free speech possibilities, and indeed the market opportunities.
Okay, I've got 5 points, which I'll make briefly to give us as much time for discussion as possible. Firstly, just to kind of reinforce exactly what Sonia says, and you probably know these figures better than me, actually, Sonia. But I think it's more than a quarter of children say that they feel they feel more themselves online than they do offline, which really then reinforces the nature that the online environment really matters in terms of the culture in which children are being brought up, if that's where they're feeling their true personality is actually able to be expressed. Secondly, point, I don't think we've talked yet about mental health. Yet more statistics out today about rising mental health difficulties, particularly amongst young women. I think we're still in relatively early evidential phase in terms of the linkages between those and between us living in a digital world. But I dare say that we will see more and more of that research coming through over the years, which finds relationships between those things. Partly that's linked to the two other things I think. The speed of which our interaction is online and the way in which conversation moves so quickly and broaden to include a huge range of people really matters, and I think has impacts upon how people experience things. And also the pervasive nature of our online communication, the 24/7 nature of it. The fact that it's very, particularly for children and young people, very difficult to move away to a space which is removed from that. And what implications does that have for the type of society that we are and the outcomes and so on that we experience? And then I think absolutely to support the point around that and we see this actually in online in lots of different ways, not just around safety, but actually around just being included in the first place, that it deepens things that already exist offline. So if we are seeing people becoming more marginalised offline, the likelihood is that these issues around speed and pervasiveness will lead to an accentuation of that in an online world. So we have to understand that whilst online does things in a certain way and does certain things differently, it is in no way kind of completely removed and separate from how we live our lives more generally.
I think Barbara wants to tap in. So if we could just...
So first of all, I want to I want to make sure that I'm from Freedom of Expression organization, but we obviously recognize that the phenomenon you describe are there and are very problematic and deplorable, and we recognize that they can cause real harm. However, we also point out, and I would disagree here with Sandra here, that we are risk averse to introduce the measures for in sake of protecting freedom of speech, and then we are disregarding the dangers this speech causes. Because in our experience, it's quite opposite. In our experience, which has been documented not just by Article 19, by many other organizations, is when we don't take protection of freedom of speech sufficiently into consideration when introducing this tool, it actually leads to further marginalization and further exclusion of those marginalized societies. So let's say Twitter started to prohibit the word queer. So any mentions on the queer would be removed because it's considered offensive, regardless of the context. Is this conducive to inclusion of queer groups and individuals in the society? No. So we disagree with the claim that there is a risk aversion for free speech protection, quite opposite. And we are actually showing how freedom of expression guarantees and transparency in particular can help to address some of those problems. Because to a greater extent, we don't know what these companies are doing. And now I'm talking about the ecosystem of the companies, and we should actually be really mindful of the fact that one-fits-for-all approach is not going to solve anything, because we should not be treating Mumsnet or Tumblr in the same way as we treat Facebook or Twitter and those companies which have a dominant position. So we really need to have a further understanding how people experience different platforms, what is the harm and some sort of dangerous consequences of experience on those platforms, and what are the different responsibilities. Unless we define what is the harm and what is the responsibility, we'll not be able to come to solutions. And also to respond to the earlier question, which said that you can't expect parents to tell children what is legal and what is not, and who decides what is legal and what is not. I didn't suggest that parents should tell the children what is legal. It's not their role. The parents should be teaching kids values, and it's not illegal to be mean, but still you can expect your kids to be kind to others and so on. But there is a responsibility for the state to define the threshold, and as also Jodie said, the threshold is already defined, and the problem is enforcement. And inconsistent and transparent enforcement. And we know from maybe anecdotal evidence of the problems with this problematic enforcement. And then we allow further on to go that way, which is we want to prevent.
I just wanted to pick up 2 points. One is, again, I would agree, the chilling effect is huge. I think we would all agree on that. I think where we disagree is the solutions for those problems. So in one corner you have people who think that the solutions to this unfettered speech that is preventing others from speaking out is to ban the people who are the noisiest. And in the other corner, which is where I would sit and Barbora would sit, we would argue that the way to tackle the chilling effect of those is to raise up other voices and find other mechanisms other than formal bans with which to deal with the problematic discourse. So that's the first thing. I think we would all agree around the chilling effect. It's the way that you would tackle that. The second thing I want to say, and this really relates to the point that you raised, Vicki, about the parents who are scared to look certain things up because they don't know if they might be breaking the law. I think that perfectly illustrates the point about what happens when you start to prescribe the kinds of expression that is allowed and is not allowed. And we know, for example, from work that we've done in universities that, for example, the implementation of prevent legislation is having an enormous chilling effect on expression in universities, for example, and from your evidence, potentially on parents who want to find out more but think that they can't find out more about radicalisation because they might find themselves flagged as someone who is involved in radicalisation themselves. And I think that demonstrates perfectly the dangers when you start to expand the kinds of content or expression that are and are not allowed, because they scoop up both legitimate inquiry with criminal intent.
I think it's the perfect time to open it up to the floor, actually. I see people with their hands up, so... Yeah. Gentleman there.
Hi, my name's Adam Kinsley from Sky. Listen, really interested to both sides of the debate here, but it seems to me that both sides of the debate could agree on one thing, which is the need for some more transparency of the processes that are currently in place on platforms, which is why I think that this side of the debate from Sonia and from Carnegie Trust is saying that there needs to be some sort of independent oversight of the processes that are in play, whether you think that that's because there's too much harm on the platforms, or because there's not enough, or because platforms might be banning words like queer. Both of those could do with somebody independent to oversee that and shine a light on the processes. On that, can you both agree? Both sides.
Absolutely. I think so. I would hope so. I mean, the Twitter example to me is exactly an example of why we don't want to leave it to the platforms, because it seems to me a daft policy which is going to have all kinds of negative consequences. I mean, I think also at the moment what we seem to have is a police force which is completely overwhelmed with the how to address the scale of the problem. Platforms who are trying to kind of salvage their reputations by taking all kinds of rather hasty actions in unaccountable ways, and schools who are being kind of pointed to it, well, you should teach kids how to be sensible and kind in a pretty crazy world. So I think the argument is that there needs to be another player in what is a very complicated ecology. And I might throw the question back to Jodie, who I don't think I disagree with as much as she thinks, but I don't know who's going to raise up those other voices. Who is going to call on the other voices to take other kinds of actions to quell or to down-rank, as it were, certain hostile voices. I don't know where, you know, it just doesn't seem to me sufficient to say we have the police, we have schools, we have... parents and children are absolutely becoming risk-averse. You know, I would stand by the research there. I think anyone who's talked to parents and children recently can see it happening. Teachers similarly. So there needs to be some other player, as it were, to revive the idea that this can be a free space for all kinds of other things to be said and not to let the trolls win.
So very quickly, I think, that is happening. I think movements like Me Too demonstrate that there is a kind of collective power that people do use for good. So I think when we keep talking about risk aversion and safety, we forget, I think, that the enormous power, positive power, that both the internet and speech can have. And I think those kinds of movements demonstrate that. In response to the Sky question, yes, I think there is room for some kind of independent oversight body, but I don't think we should underestimate the scale of the problem. I think Facebook receives something like 1 million complaints a day about content on the platform, and trying to work out a system in which that can, the most egregious examples of them implementing or exercising their terms of conditions in a way that they shouldn't, it is going to be extraordinarily complex, I think, even just to capture a tiny number of those.
I think David,
Just a very quick comment, actually, to Sky question as well. I agree, and actually Article 19 already proposed a similar mechanism. We call it Social Media Council, but with the caveat that the standards should be, or overall values and standards should be the same, but then they should be applied to different platforms differently. And here we have a dominant platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Google, that have different responsibilities as those smaller ones. And the one approach fits all would be actually dangerous, because it would not distinguish sufficiently between the usability, and also you can't enforce Facebook kind of solutions to smaller platforms because you want to make them competitive and also they would not have the resources. So yes, but with the caveat of tailor-made solutions based for platforms.
I think that, David, if we could just get David to make a point quickly, and then Douglas, and then we're going to move on to the final section where Andrew's going to talk.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so it's really to put a point, picking up on Sonia's part about our services that are there to support children. So we kind of talked about law enforcement and the point I made earlier on about their understanding, and the point about schools, and also probably mental health services, or our teenage mental health services as well, I think are in lots of ways just completely overwhelmed. And in lots of cases, it becomes too complicated. It's too complex. It becomes overwhelming, and so often nothing happens. So some data in terms of, so from 13,000 schools in the UK, despite this being in schools in England a statutory obligation, 46% of schools don't have any form of professional development programme in this particular case. I think because it is often just too complicated. So this point around the capability of those working and tasked with working with children is lacking too.
Just to briefly say, I think the point about regulation at that system level is absolutely right, and it's very important we're talking about system level regulation, not content level regulation. And what we're proposing, what we're talking about, is through the duty of care. Is you define the set of outcomes that you wish to achieve, and then you task platforms with reaching those and ensuring that their systems do the things that they need to do in order to deliver on that. And there are some pretty obvious things that those systems are likely to include, like age verification policies, parental controls, queer terms and conditions, complaints mechanisms and redress mechanisms, which while Facebook might have in place, not all platforms have in place. And it's the whole point about it is to bring a higher degree of transparency and consistency and a greater preventative approach across the whole landscape, while still giving the freedom to platforms to actually use their own expertise, their own knowledge of their own platform, their own ability to innovate, to actually continue to implement new solutions in order to help achieve that overall outcome. And then the crucial role of that independent regulatory function is then to be able to share across industry, with civil society, get civil society's input to say, actually, these are the mechanisms that appear to be working. Let's continue to improve. So it becomes a process of continuous improvement towards that agreed set of outcomes that as a society we define that we wish to achieve.
Brilliant. Okay, so I think we're going to move swiftly on to the last section. We are overrunning slightly, so apologies about that, but I think we're going to listen to Andrew now from DCMS. He's going to speak around the white paper for 5 or so minutes, then we will take comments and questions, but like I said, let's swiftly move it through.
Okay. Am I talking from here? Or?
You can talk from there, I think.
No, it's fine.
The goldfish are static now, I think, for now.
The goldfish aren't swimming around very much.
No,
the least active goldfish. Anyway, so thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for a really interesting discussion, which I've been listening to with a lot of interest. And just to say, I'm Andrew Honeyman from the Online Harms White Paper team at the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. Is that better? Can everybody hear me now? Good. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the background to the white paper and then a bit about what might be in it. So obviously with limitations on what I can say about content. But so in terms of background, we published our Internet Safety Strategy Green Paper last October. We followed that with a public consultation. We published the government response to that in May of this year. The consultation highlighted 3 main issues. So online behaviours too often fail to meet acceptable standards, users can feel powerless to address these issues, and technology companies can operate without proper oversight, transparency or accountability. And commercial interests can often mean that they can fail to act in users' best interests. So in that government response in May, we announced our intention to publish a joint DCMS Home Office white paper to set out some more definitive steps on online harms and safety, including proposals for future legislation. And this represented a shift in our approach, which would previously focus much more on voluntary action and expanded the scope of our work to cover both harmful and illegal content, and hence then the link to the Home Office. As we progress this work, we're determined that UK should be a world leader in terms of innovation-friendly regulation that both encourages the tech sector and provide stability for business. And we're very conscious that this is a new and really difficult area, and as Sonia and others have pointed out, we've got a real challenge on our hands. This internet safety work falls within the digital charter, as the Minister talked about earlier on, and our work recognises the hugely positive aspects of being online. We're considering how government can ensure that all users, including children, are able to access these benefits while also managing the risks. As the Minister said, we're aiming to publish the white paper in the winter. It's likely to contain a mixture of legislative and non-legislative measures. As I say, we're talking and listening to stakeholders all the time at the moment, including this event today. There's a limit to what I can say about the content, but in terms of the principles that are underpinning our work, so freedom of expression is right up there. Similarly, promoting growth and innovation, protecting SMEs and startups. Adaptability, so we use the word future-proof, making sure that whatever we introduce is adaptable enough to cope with the developments that we simply can't anticipate at the moment. As Sonia alluded to, one of the challenges we have is to keep the scope of the white paper manageable and feasible to introduce. Douglas mentioned the duty of care model of regulation, which Carnegie Trust and others are promoting. NSPCC are talking about something similar. We're talking to those people. We're really interested in that idea. It's not the only one that's out there. And similarly, I'm interested in the paper that Sonia mentioned from the LSE about a new independent agency. I think it's worth saying, as well as kind of keeping the scope of the white paper manageable, it's not going to be the end of the journey by any means. We're not going to cover everything in there. We won't crack everything. There will be a consultation alongside the white paper and so on. And then, as I say, it's likely that we'll be looking to introduce legislation after that. Just a few things about what's likely to be in the white paper. So, as part of the government response in May, we published a draft transparency reporting template so we can better understand the extent of potentially harmful behaviours and content online, and also users' awareness and the use of reporting mechanisms. So we're talking to social media providers and others to refine the arrangements for transparency reporting, conscious that draft that we published wasn't perfect. And likewise, the draft social media code of practice that was also in that in the government response in May. It's kind of interesting that recently YouTube and Facebook have both published their own transparency reports, so it's kind of encouraging to see some progress in this area. As I said, there's likely to be some non-legislative action as well as the potentially legislation. So think safety first is an area we're really interested in, considering the opportunity for technical solutions. For example, many social media platforms use privacy settings to enable users to decide who they share information with and who can contact them. Our Think Safety First builds on this. As we set out in the government response, to create a safer digital ecosystem, we need to influence the development of new and emerging platforms. We want to support developers and designers to include safety features in new applications and platforms from the start so that we're not having to retrofit. And we'll be setting out further details about this work in the white paper. It's very much a cross-government white paper, so we're talking to colleagues in the Department for Education as well. During some of the focus groups we ran with young people, digital literacy, which is already part of the school curriculum, was highlighted as being something that's really important in terms of giving children the tools they need to make smart choices online, helping them to critically interpret what they see. So we're working with DFE on the online safety aspects of the curriculum. And similarly, we're working with the Department for Health and Social Care in relation to young people's mental health and social media. Our work will be informed by the Chief Medical Officer's review of the impact that technology has on young people's mental health, which is due to be published early next year. And similarly, you may be aware that the Information Commissioner's Office is developing an age-appropriate design code. And the code will provide guidance on the design standards that the Commissioner will expect providers of online services which process personal data like to be accessed by children to meet. The Minister spoke about the UK Council for Internet Safety. It's a really important group for us. They've previously published guidance on issues such as sexting and tackling race and faith-targeted bullying. So look, the internet, clearly something which cuts across every aspect of modern life. It's crucial we're taking a collaborative approach on this, and so we're engaging as much as we can as we take this forward with our new expanded scope of both harmful and illegal activities. And we're aiming that we hope that by working with this wide range of stakeholders, we'll see some real progress taking forward online safety initiatives so that everyone, including children and young people, can access the benefits of the internet successfully.
Thank you very much for that, Andrew. I think we'll take one comment each from each panellist, and then if we have time, quickly open it out to the floor. So if we'd like to start with Sonia and just move down, one comment or question.
So I really welcome the breadth of what you just outlined, and I think the really crucial task then that I'm hoping you'll also deal with comes back to these questions of process. The challenge is going to be one of coordination and of compliance. And at the moment, some of us have lived through a lot of codes of practice of different platforms and different bodies, and they get announced with a great fanfare, and I've not yet seen them being evaluated and implemented. I think we really need to move into the world in which we evaluate what works and we really begin to learn from what's working, and we make sure that really crucial parts of the overall picture don't fall between the gaps of those different ministries and different actions. But it sounds very promising.
I agree. It sounds incredibly promising, and I think what is particularly gratifying, if I'm with Sonia, I feel as though I've lived through quite a few phases of these different initiatives, but actually this one does feel as though we're in a new stage of the conversation, and it's a stage of the conversation that feels very productive and possibly more productive than the years where it all fell to self-regulation, or it all fell to parents, or it all fell to schools. This does feel as though it's a much more collaborative and hopefully a more productive stage. I guess what pops into my head is the future-proofing. I think of the young woman that was speaking earlier on, talking about AI and how that was going to influence future jobs, and how we needed to be starting to talk to young people now about what their career options might be and how AI might be part of that picture. I know she had 3 forms of AI, but I'll take the first one. And I think protecting that, which goes hand in hand with this issue of not creating a country that is incredibly risk-averse. I absolutely agree with Sonia on the issue of families becoming more risk-averse. They absolutely are. Parents are becoming more nervous about the internet, and that really is a problem if we are hoping to raise children who will benefit from the opportunities that digital will give them. So I hope that its name is all about internet safety, but I hope its ambition is about making sure that we all get to flourish online and not just stay safe, because that's quite a low baseline.
Yeah, totally. And I think in terms of, we're really conscious of the importance of the role of parents. There's an education strand, I think, not just for children, but for parents and companies too, actually, to help parents have the confidence to deal with some of these issues, and I think that's going to be a really important part.
You mentioned the engagement that we've had with you, Andrew, during the process. We've been very grateful for that, and we enjoyed that, and obviously very happy to continue liaising on that duty of care proposal as you develop things over the next few months. I was also going to pick future-proofing. Really jumps out as something we haven't really talked about yet this morning, but you mentioned it. Very, very important indeed. And that the opportunities to set these kind of core systems, if you like, won't come that often. We don't want to be doing them every year. Whilst this is the start of a journey, we don't want to have something in place that isn't having to be adapted every few months when the next technological innovation comes through. So it's absolutely vital. Interestingly, it was clarified in the House of Lords quite recently that the health and safety at work legislation, which was passed in the 1970s, is defined as being applicable for AI. So a piece of legislation which could not possibly have envisaged how AI might be used in the workplace when it was first passed was designed in such a way to be future-proofing. So that kind of work is possible, and hopefully we can do something similarly effective here. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much, and we also appreciate that you involved civil society already in this initial stage in discussion about the white paper. So from my perspective, I think the biggest challenge for you will be how to link this with the online harms, with making UK also very competitive, and linking it to the digital charter, and how to fix the problems on the market through the regulation. And I think that here the challenge is, again, what I said earlier, not to enforce the dominant platform system on the smaller platforms, because then you remove the competitiveness in this sense. And I think that this paper also needs to be really rooted in understanding the ecosystem of the internet and how it works, and also how it's a data-driven market, and how advertisers also influence this ecosystem. So without also addressing and looking for the solutions, how, let's say, self-regulation in advertisement already offers some solutions here, and how this can be promoted. And that links back to the competitive nature of the market and how you want to link it to that as well.
Yes, so to echo the future-proofing point, my children are 9 and 11. I can't ever imagine them using Facebook, for example. It doesn't feature on their radar, and I doubt it ever will, because that's not the technologies they're using or that they're growing up with. It's absolutely vital that we involve those kinds of children, not necessarily my children, they'd be horrified if I suggested that they, but young people who are using all sorts of different technologies in this discussion. It's absolutely key. The second thing I think is also points to Vicki and Sonia's points. Risk aversion is becoming a huge problem online. That's a huge problem for freedom of expression. It's a huge challenge for all sorts of other things. But recognizing that, I think, means that DCMS and others need to think very carefully about how this whole debate and narrative is framed. So this white paper started out, or the green paper started out as the internet safety strategy. It's now become the online harms department. We need to think very carefully about how we are wording and describing these things. You talk about safety first, safety by design. It's really important that we think about protection of human rights by design, that we put those things first as well. So I would really urge you and the others in your team to think very hard about the narrative that you are promoting when you are in discussions about this work.
Okay, to the final point, I guess. There was a particular, reference, I think, I would very much encourage in terms of the online harms paper. So talking to DFE, clearly education is delegated, and so I would very much encourage the conversation with the Welsh Government, Scottish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive, because they clearly have different curriculums as well, so please not to forget those, given it is a UK-wide paper. But very much, I think, from a presenter's perspective, applauding the efforts. So these sorts of conversations aren't going on elsewhere in the world, and so I think, so that the point the Minister made earlier on around we do kind of lead online safety globally, it is really much encouraging, and so we applaud that effort, especially at a time that is consuming in terms of Brexit, consuming ministerial and political and everybody's time, I'm sure. So would just encourage that conversation, that dialogue as well. There can be little as important as protecting our children.
Excellent. Okay. Well, yeah, quick response.
No, I think that's really helpful. All those comments are taken on board. I think we are talking to devolved administrations. I think the point about the narrative is spot on. We need to make sure that we're getting the balance right and getting the language right, and that's a challenge for us. We're certainly not just looking at the dominant platforms. We're looking at SMEs and startups as well, and so on. So, yeah, I think these are all really helpful points we take on board.
Brilliant. Okay, unfortunately, we don't have time to open up to the floor. What I would say is that we've got a lunch break, we've got another coffee break, I know the speakers will be happy to talk more about this. So please do kind of carry on chatting about this throughout the day. I think we wanted to show with this event sort of the level of interest in this area and kind of capture the debate that's going on offline about what we need to do online. And hopefully we've done that. I think that what Vicki said about this feeling like it's a new phase of conversation was very interesting, and it feels more collaborative. I think that's a very good thing, and I think it fits with both the objectives of the UK IGF and also the theme for today, which is solutions for the digital age. So I think it was a great debate. Thank you to everyone who contributed. Sorry to those who didn't have time to contribute, and thank you very much.